Kuro just announced their first nerf in Wuthering Waves. It's not to a character, it's not to a weapon, it's, to a boss. Located on the 4th floor of the Tower of Adversity, Scar is a boss that has been causing players some problems. With the moveset heavily inspired by bosses from Elden Ring, he's an opponent that in many ways requires a different approach to combat to tackle successfully, at least on the current tower cycle. Kuro has recently announced that Scar is going to be attacking a lot less in the next reset of the Tower of Adversity, as they've received a fair amount of criticism from the player base regarding how difficult this encounter is. Nerfs, especially in gacha games, are a very scary subject. With the context that Wuthering Waves is designed as a combat-focused, skill-oriented game, nerfs to enemies have had the hardcore portion of the player base wondering if this is a bad omen for what lies ahead. We all remember when Genshin Impact nerfed the Tartaglia boss fight, and how the game hasn't seen much challenging content since. Many players fear that Wuthering Waves and its challenging content may suffer the same fate. Today, we'll be discussing whether or not these nerfs and concerns are justified, breaking down the current dynamic of the Scar fight in the Tower of Adversity, where players are experiencing hardship, and whether or not these nerfs are actually healthy given the design of combat within Wuthering Waves. As always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. I'll be the first person to admit that the Scar fight was one of the most difficult fights I've ever experienced within Wuthering Waves. While he lacks the raw damage and tankiness on hologram boss fights, the time limit for 3 stars within the tower adds its own unique pressure when approaching the content. However, Scar still does a massive amount of damage. Enough to nearly one-shot characters and force you to spend more time on healers to survive, if you're a player who got hit by any of his attacks. His attack design with telegraphed, delayed swings, and huge hitboxes can take a while to get used to, and it's almost mandatory to repeatedly dodge throughout his attack chains, as it's difficult to get anything more than a counter in between those attacks unless you're willing to tank some hits or pull off some sick swap cancel moves. This isn't much different from other bosses with long, drawn-out attack chains. The problem that many players are facing, however, is how often he's attacking. With Scar's floor giving special fusion and resonance skill damage bonuses, it's specifically designed for Chang Li. It requires a lot of micromanagement, swap canceling, and use of damage mitigation features like the Bellborn Geochalone and the damage reduction from transformative echo skills to get off a lot of her combos without, well, dying. I figured it out, but wow. It took a while, and it took me a while sweating on PC controls. What I've been able to realize though, after numerous attempts across both cycles, is that there is a fundamental design problem with Scar in the Tower of Adversity. But it's not how often he's attacking. It's the types of attacks that he's using. The Tower of Adversity version of Scar has absolutely no parryable attacks. Not a single one. The only way to mitigate his damage is to either tank it with damage reduction buffs, dodge, or swap cancel. And that feels a bit off, especially when the weekly version of Scar has parryable attacks. What this means is that breaking his stagger bar and rendering him immobile and vulnerable to attacks is something that is much harder for Scar compared to virtually every other boss in the tower. In my 3-star clear, I was only able to break him a single time, and only when he was already below half health. This is because intro skills are the only way to deal meaningful damage to Scar's stagger bar. And what this ultimately means is that this boss has very few openings that a character like Chang Li can capitalize on, especially for the average player. With a character like Chang Li designed around repeated combos and chained attacks that can easily lose a lot of her damage potential when she gets hit or interrupted, this makes her a bit difficult to pilot against the current version of Scar. And when Chang Li is the on-banner limited character and Kuro is, well, trying to make money, this is not good for business. If the average player, who makes up a majority of the player base, doesn't have a good experience with a limited character in a fight specifically designed for them, that's likely going to have a significant impact on how they feel about the pulls that they spent and the pulls they might spend in the future. And believe me, it's not a positive impact. We have to remember that if we want Wuthering Waves to thrive, Kuro has to make money. If the design of a boss battle is threatening their revenue, it's in the best interests of the entire player base for that change to be made. That means more sales, more funds for development, and more fantastic, innovative character designs that we can all enjoy in the future. If the reason for a nerf is to ensure the health of the game in the long run, that's something that we as players should support. However, the approach that Kuro is taking to reduce his attack frequency is, in my opinion, not the right way to go about it. A huge part of combat in Wuthering Waves is your reaction to enemy actions. In most boss fights, you can parry, dodge, or even sidestep attacks to deal damage across dangerous situations. With Scar, dodging or swap canceling for its invulnerability window is one of the only ways to fight this boss without getting your teeth kicked in. There's not a lot of choice when you approach this encounter, and it's rather disappointing how much different the tower version of Scar is compared to his weekly boss version. My solution is simple and reinforces the design principles behind combat in Wuthering Waves. Just add some parryable attacks to this godforsaken boss. If he has a ground slam move that can deal over 10,000 damage, that is something that should be parryable. There needs to be skill expression in this fight beyond pressing the dodge button or swap canceling. And parries are one of the most satisfying vehicles for skill expression in the game. With parries dealing a tremendous amount of damage to stagger bars as well, this would also open up many more damage windows for players if they're able to capitalize on those parries. Kuro, with this change, would be able to turn Scar's high attack frequency into both a challenge and an opportunity, instead of the dodge fiesta that the fight currently is. With Chang Li having fantastic parry windows across many of her abilities, this would also heavily improve her overall feel in a fight literally designed for her. Wuthering Waves is a game that thrives off options and player decision making. The problem with Scar right now is that there's not a lot of decisions that you can make in the fight. It's not that the fight is necessarily too hard, it's that the fight is far too limiting in what tools you can actually use to clear. Hopefully, this overview was helpful in highlighting why exactly Scar got nerfed, and why Kuro's current approach might not be the best way of addressing the situation. While we haven't gotten the full details of the changes just yet, we can only hope that they haven't made the fight strictly easier. Giving players options for the fight, instead of simplifying it, would make the overall experience a lot better. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.